Ava Carter had spent most of her life believing that ordinary people were invisible at 27. Her days followed the same exhausting routine. She worked as a junior accountant at a small financial firm in Chicago, balanced overdue bills, and helped support her younger brother through college. Every paycheck disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Dreams had become luxuries she could no longer afford. When a client unexpectedly offered her a ticket to the Street Matthew Children's Charity Gala, Ava almost declined. Events like that belonged to wealthy people, politicians, celebrities, and business elites, not people like her. Still, after months of endless work and financial stress, she accepted. The gala was being held in one of downtown Chicago's most prestigious hotels. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the massive ballroom, while elegant music floated through the air. Expensive suits and designer gowns filled every corner of the venue. The moment Ava entered, she felt completely out of place. She stayed near the edges of the room, quietly observing conversations she had no interest in joining. Most guests barely noticed her. One man did, Dominic Moretti. His presence dominated the ballroom without effort. People lowered their voices when he walked past. Security personnel remained close without appearing obvious. Business leaders eagerly sought his attention. Although newspapers described him as a successful entrepreneur, the city knew a different version of Dominic Moretti. Rumors connected him to power, influence, and fear. Many considered him one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. Ava had seen photographs of him before. She never expected to see him in person. She certainly never expected him to keep looking at her. The first time she noticed, she assumed it was coincidence. The second time made her uncomfortable. By the third time, she became certain. Dominic was watching her, not casually, not the way a man might notice an attractive woman. His attention carried a different intensity. His expression remained serious every time their eyes met, almost as if he was studying something or anticipating something. Ava looked behind herself more than once, wondering if someone else stood nearby. There wasn't. His attention remained fixed on her. A strange uneasiness settled inside her. Instinct told her something wasn't right. She began observing the crowd more carefully. Several unfamiliar faces immediately stood out. A tall man near the entrance appeared more interested in scanning guests than enjoying the event. Another remained beside a support pillar for nearly 20 minutes without speaking to anyone. A third slowly moved through the ballroom while repeatedly checking the same sections of the room. Individually, none of them appeared suspicious. Together, they created a pattern Ava couldn't ignore. Across the ballroom, Dominic seemed to notice the same thing. His gaze continuously shifted between those individuals and Ava. Several members of his security team subtly adjusted their positions. The atmosphere around him grew increasingly tense. Although nobody else appeared aware of it, Ava could sense something changing. The comfortable elegance of the evening slowly gave way to an invisible pressure spreading through the room. For reasons she couldn't explain, she suddenly wanted to leave. Without drawing attention to herself, Ava picked up her purse and headed toward the nearest exit. She moved quickly through the crowd, hoping fresh air would clear the uneasy feeling growing inside her. She was only a few feet away from the ballroom doors when a powerful hand suddenly grabbed her arm. Before she could understand what was happening, Dominic Moretti pulled her sharply away from the path she had been walking. The moment Dominic Moretti pulled Ava away from the ballroom exit, the entire evening exploded into chaos. A deafening gunshot echoed through the grand hall. Then another and another. Screams immediately replaced the soft music that had filled the room only seconds earlier. Hundreds of guests rushed in every direction. Tables overturned. Crystal glasses shattered across the marble floor. People pushed past one another in blind panic, desperate to escape. Ava froze. Her mind struggled to process what was happening. This was the kind of violence people saw on television, not in real life. Not at a charity gala. Not in front of politicians, executives, and community leaders. Dominic reacted instantly, without hesitation. He positioned himself between Ava and the direction of the gunfire. His security team moved with military precision. Within seconds, several armed men surrounded them while scanning every corner of the ballroom. More shots rang out. One of the chandeliers exploded overhead, sending glass raining onto the floor below. Ava watched guests dive for cover. Others crawled beneath tables. Several security personnel exchanged gunfire with attackers positioned throughout the building. The situation felt unreal. Every instinct told her to run, but Dominic's men were already guiding her toward a secured hallway behind the main ballroom. As they moved, Ava noticed something strange. The shooters were not firing randomly. They appeared to be targeting specific areas, specific people. Their movements looked coordinated, planned, professional. The realization made her stomach tighten. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't an act of desperation. Someone had organized this attack. Someone had spent considerable resources making sure it happened. Within minutes, Dominic's team escorted Ava through a private service corridor leading away from the main event. Emergency alarms echoed throughout the building. Outside, police sirens approached from every direction. News helicopters already circled overhead. By the time authorities reached the scene, much of the violence had ended. The attackers had vanished as quickly as they appeared. Inside a black armored SUV, Ava finally found enough courage to speak. Questions flooded her mind. Why had Dominic pulled her away? How had he known danger was coming? Why was she sitting inside a vehicle surrounded by armed bodyguards? Most importantly, why had he risked his own safety to protect someone he didn't even know? Dominic offered no answers. Throughout the entire drive, he remained silent. His expression stayed cold and focused while he studied information appearing on a secure tablet. The city lights disappeared behind them. Soon they arrived at an isolated property hidden behind tall security gates on the outskirts of Chicago. The residence looked more like a fortress than a home. Cameras covered every entrance. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Ava was escorted inside. Hours later, after the initial shock began fading, she found herself alone in a private office. Curiosity eventually overcame fear. Several documents had been left on a nearby desk. At first, she intended to ignore them. Then she noticed her own photograph. Confused, she stepped closer. The file contained surveillance images, personal records, background reports. Every page carried her name, and at the very top of the folder sat a single intelligence summary that made her blood run cold. The attackers of the gala had never been hunting Dominic Moretti. They had been hunting Ava Carter. The discovery of the surveillance file changed everything. Only hours earlier, Ava Carter had been an ordinary woman attending a charity gala. Now she was sitting inside one of the most secure properties in Chicago, while armed guards protected every entrance. Nothing about her life made sense anymore. The next morning, Ava confronted Dominic. She demanded answers. She wanted to know why someone had spent months tracking her movements. She wanted to know why professional killers had targeted her. Most importantly, she wanted to know what Dominic wasn't telling her. For the first time, Dominic didn't dismiss her questions. Instead, he revealed that his investigators had been examining her background since before the gala attack. At first, they found nothing unusual. Ava's records appeared ordinary. School transcripts, employment history, medical records, tax information. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Too normal. That was the problem. Dominic had spent his entire life around criminals, politicians, and corrupt businessmen. He knew that when a person's history looked flawless, someone had often worked very hard to make it appear that way. His team began digging deeper. The deeper they searched, the stranger things became. Certain government files had disappeared. Archive court documents were missing. Several records connected to Ava's family had been sealed decades earlier without explanation. The investigation eventually focused on one person, Ava's late father. For most of her life, she believed he had been an ordinary accountant who died in a traffic accident when she was a child. That story had never seemed unusual. Until now, Dominic's investigators discovered inconsistencies surrounding the accident. Witness reports had vanished. Police records contained conflicting information. Several names connected to the case appeared repeatedly throughout other corruption investigations. A pattern slowly emerged. Corrupt officials, compromised law enforcement officers, political figures who had spent years protecting dangerous people. Every trail somehow connected back to the same period in Chicago's history. As the evidence accumulated, Ava struggled to accept what she was seeing. Her father wasn't the man she thought he was. Entire portions of her childhood had been constructed around carefully manufactured lies. The realization hit harder than she expected. People often believe the most painful betrayal comes from enemies. The truth is far more unsettling. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from discovering that your own memories cannot be trusted. Meanwhile, news of the failed attack had begun spreading through criminal networks. Old enemies who had remained silent for years suddenly became active again. Unknown groups started searching for information about Ava. Several individuals connected to long-forgotten investigations disappeared within days. Someone was cleaning up loose ends. Someone was terrified that hidden secrets might surface. Dominic became increasingly convinced of one thing. The attack at the gala wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about power. Someone feared what Ava might eventually uncover. Late that evening, one of Dominic's investigators arrived, carrying a sealed archive box recovered from an abandoned storage facility. Inside were documents believed lost for decades. Among them sat a heavily classified government file bearing Ava's father's name. The room fell silent as Dominic opened it. A single page immediately caught his attention. The document confirmed a truth that changed everything they thought they knew. Years before his death, Ava's father had secretly worked against one of the most powerful criminal empires in American history. The classified file changed the direction of the investigation overnight. If Ava's father had truly worked against a powerful criminal empire, then the attack at the gala was only a small piece of a much larger story. For security reasons, Ava remained inside Dominic Moretti's estate. Days gradually turned into weeks. At first, she viewed the property as a prison disguised as protection. The estate was heavily guarded. Security checkpoints monitored every entrance. Armed personnel worked around the clock. Leaving without approval was impossible. Yet the longer Ava stayed, the more her assumptions began to change. She expected fear. She expected cruelty. She expected to witness the ruthless behavior that had built Dominic's reputation throughout Chicago. Instead, she observed something entirely different. The people working for him respected him, not out of fear, out of loyalty. Employees greeted him with genuine admiration. Security personnel trusted his decisions without hesitation. Even senior members of the organization followed his rules with unusual discipline. Dominic demanded absolute accountability. Mistakes were corrected immediately. Dishonesty was never tolerated. But Ava never witnessed unnecessary cruelty. Every decision appeared calculated and controlled. The contrast confused her. Publicly, Dominic was portrayed as a dangerous criminal. Privately, he behaved more like a leader carrying responsibilities few people understood. As Ava continued assisting with the investigation, she gained access to thousands of archived records. Her organizational skills quickly became valuable. Documents were sorted. Connections were identified. Missing timelines were reconstructed. Dominic began relying on her observations more frequently. Their interactions became less formal, more natural. For the first time since arriving at the estate, Ava felt useful rather than helpless. During late nights reviewing files, she also learned more about Dominic's personal history. His rise to power had cost him nearly everything. Friends had died. Family members had disappeared. Trust had become a luxury he could rarely afford. Power looked impressive from a distance. Up close, it looked exhausting. That realization unsettled Ava more than she expected. The world often labels people as heroes or villains because simple stories are easy to understand. Real life is rarely that simple. The more she learned about Dominic, the harder it became to fit him into either category. Meanwhile, pressure continued building around the organization. Several rival groups had become increasingly aggressive. Surveillance operations intensified. Unknown enemies tested security vulnerabilities. Someone was preparing for another move. The atmosphere inside the state grew tense. Despite the danger surrounding them, Ava found herself paying closer attention to Dominic, not because she trusted him completely, but because she was beginning to understand him. That realization created a conflict she wasn't ready to face. One evening, while reviewing communication records connected to the gala attack, Ava noticed something unusual. A timestamp appeared in multiple encrypted reports. The information should have been restricted, Only a handful of trusted people had access to it. Yet, somehow the shooters had known exactly where to position themselves. Curious, Ava traced the data trail through several internal files. What she discovered made her heart stop. The attack had not succeeded because of outside surveillance. Someone from inside Dominic's inner circle had secretly leaked information directly to the people who tried to kill her. The discovery of the information leak sent shockwaves through Dominic Moretti's organization. For years, Dominic had survived attacks from rivals, corrupt officials, and ambitious criminals who wanted his empire. But betrayal from within was different. An enemy outside the walls was dangerous. An enemy already inside them was deadly. Dominic immediately launched a confidential internal investigation. Only a small group of trusted personnel knew what had been discovered. Every communication channel was monitored. Financial transactions were reviewed. Employee records were examined. No one was above suspicion, not even Dominic's oldest allies. The atmosphere inside the estate changed overnight. Conversations became cautious. Meetings grew tense. People who had worked together for years suddenly questioned one another. Trust, once broken, spread uncertainty faster than fear ever could. Ava remained deeply involved in the investigation. Her ability to organize information and identify hidden patterns proved invaluable. While others focused on individuals, Ava focused on connections. She examined financial records, archive reports, and encrypted communications gathered over several years. Slowly, a disturbing picture emerged. Money had been disappearing from company accounts through a network of shell corporations. Small amounts at first, barely noticeable. Then larger transfers began appearing. Someone had been secretly funding outside operations for years. The corruption extended far beyond a single leak. At the same time, encrypted messages revealed communication between unknown contacts and members of rival syndicates. Several criminal organizations that normally hated one another appeared to be working together. That alone suggested something far bigger than a simple power struggle. As evidence accumulated, Dominic realized conspiracy surrounding Ava connected directly to forces operating inside his own empire. The two investigations were becoming one. Meanwhile, pressure continued mounting from outside enemies. Intelligence reports suggested rival groups were preparing another coordinated strike. The failed Gal attack had not ended their plans. It had only delayed them. The situation became increasingly personal for Dominic. Every new discovery forced him to question people he had trusted for years. Men who had stood beside him through wars, negotiations, and impossible situations now appeared capable of betrayal. Power demanded loyalty, but loyalty could never be purchased permanently. That truth haunted every decision he made. As the investigation progressed, Ava noticed something important. One suspect repeatedly appeared near critical pieces of evidence. Never directly involved. Never obvious. Always just close enough. The individual had spent years building a reputation for reliability, which made the discovery even more dangerous. The most effective traitors were rarely the loudest enemies. They were often the people nobody suspected. As Dominic closed in, mistakes began appearing. Encrypted messages were deleted too quickly. Financial records vanished unexpectedly. Surveillance footage disappeared from secure servers. Someone knew they were being hunted. Someone was desperate. The breakthrough finally came late one evening when investigators identified a hidden communication device linked directly to the leak network. The evidence was undeniable. The mole had been standing beside Dominic for years. But before security teams could make an arrest, the traitor disappeared. Vehicles left safe houses. Communication channels went silent. Emergency protocols activated across multiple locations. The suspect had escaped. Even worse, final intercepted transmissions revealed one devastating truth. Before fleeing, the traitor had transmitted Ava Carter's exact location directly to the enemies who wanted her dead. The traitor's escape changed everything. Within hours, information about Ava Carter spread through criminal networks across Chicago. Organizations that normally competed against one another suddenly shared a common objective. Everyone wanted to find Ava. The question was no longer whether she was in danger. The question was why so many powerful people were willing to risk everything to get to her first. Dominic understood the situation immediately. This was no longer about revenge for the failed gala attack. Something hidden in Ava's past had become valuable enough to unite enemies who had spent years trying to destroy each other. For the first time in decades, Dominic mobilized nearly his entire network. Safe houses were activated. Communication routes were secured. Trusted personnel were reassigned exclusively to Ava's protection. The scale of the operation shocked even Dominic's closest advisors. Many questioned whether one woman could possibly justify such extraordinary measures. Dominic ignored every objection. His priority remained unchanged. Ava had survived. Meanwhile, investigators continued digging into files connected to Ava's father. The deeper they searched, the darker the truth became. Years earlier, Ava's father had secretly gathered evidence against a powerful alliance of corrupt politicians, business executives, and criminal leaders. Together, they had controlled contracts, elections, law enforcement decisions, and billions of dollars in illegal profits. Before he could expose them, he disappeared. His death had never been properly investigated. Now it appeared that his work had never truly vanished. The evidence had simply remained hidden, and somehow Ava had become the final link connecting everything. The revelation left her shaken. For most of her life, she had believed her father was an ordinary man who died under unfortunate circumstances. Now she understood that his death may have been part of a much larger conspiracy. An entire system of corruption had been built on secrets he tried to expose. The knowledge weighed heavily on her. People were risking their lives because of information connected to her family. Good people, loyal people, people who had done nothing wrong. Several dangerous pursuits followed during the next few days. Vehicles were intercepted. Safe locations were compromised. Unknown attackers appeared unexpectedly in places that should have been secure. Each escape became more difficult than the last. Every close call increased the pressure. Ava began questioning whether Dominic should continue protecting her at all. The danger surrounding her seemed endless. But Dominic never considered abandoning the mission. No matter how many resources were required, no matter how many enemies appeared, no matter how complicated the situation became, his determination revealed something Ava had been trying to ignore for weeks. She mattered to him, far more than either of them were willing to admit. As rival organizations tightened their search, Dominic prepared one final relocation plan. A heavily secured convoy would move Ava to a remote location beyond the reach of their enemies. For a brief moment, it seemed the strategy might succeed. The route was carefully chosen. Security teams were positioned perfectly. Every known threat had been accounted for. But someone had anticipated the plan. Halfway through the transfer, the convoy was ambushed. Vehicles crashed. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Chaos consumed the operation. Dominic fought desperately to reach Ava's vehicle. Yet despite every precaution, every sacrifice, and every effort to protect her, he arrived seconds too late. Ava Carter had been captured before Dominic could reach her. The news of Ava Carter's capture spread through Dominic Moretti's organization like a shockwave. For a brief moment, fear threatened to overwhelm even his most loyal people. Then Dominic did something that surprised everyone. He declared war. Every trusted ally he had built relationships with over the years received the same message. The time for defense was over. The time for ending conspiracy had arrived. Within hours, intelligence teams began combining everything they had learned from months of investigation: financial records, communication logs, property ownership documents, hidden transactions. Piece by piece, the final structure of the conspiracy emerged. Several criminal leaders, corrupt politicians, and business figures had been working together for years. The same people connected to Ava's father's disappearance were responsible for the attacks, the cover-ups, and the attempt to eliminate Ava herself. More importantly, their locations were finally known. The operation began after midnight. Multiple teams moved simultaneously across the city. Safe houses were raided. Hidden meeting locations were exposed. Protected compounds came under attack. For the first time, the conspirators found themselves running instead of hunting. An important truth often hides behind power. People who spend years controlling others eventually begin believing they are untouchable. That arrogance became their greatest weakness. As the pressure intensified, alliances started collapsing. Partners betrayed one another. Secret agreements fell apart. Individuals rushed to protect themselves. Information flowed faster than anyone could contain it. At the same time, journalists and federal investigators received anonymous evidence exposing several public officials connected to organized corruption. The conspiracy was beginning to crumble from both inside and outside. Meanwhile, Ava fought her own battle. Held inside a heavily guarded warehouse near the industrial district, she understood that rescue was uncertain. Instead of surrendering to fear, she focused on survival. She observed routines, studied weaknesses, remembered details. Her father had spent years risking everything to expose the truth. She refused to become the reason his sacrifice failed. When an opportunity finally appeared, Ava acted. Her attempt to escape created confusion throughout the facility and delayed the plans of her captors. That courage bought valuable time. Time Dominic desperately needed. By dawn, the largest confrontation of the conflict erupted at the warehouse complex. Gunfire echoed across the abandoned industrial zone. Several key conspirators attempted to flee. Most failed. Others turned against one another in desperation. Years of secrets surfaced within a matter of hours. The carefully protected empire corruption collapsed faster than anyone imagined. Dominic pushed deeper into the compound despite repeated warnings. The mission had stopped being about strategy. It had become personal. Every obstacle between him and Ava disappeared through sheer determination. When he finally reached the upper level of the warehouse, he found her cornered but alive. For the first time since her capture, relief replaced fear. The battle continued around them, but the worst was over. By sunrise, the conspiracy that had operated for decades was effectively destroyed. Arrests followed. Evidence surfaced publicly. Surviving conspirators disappeared into custody. The city would spend years uncovering the full extent of corruption. As emergency vehicles filled the streets and the chaos slowly settled, Ava believed the nightmare had finally ended. Then she discovered a classified file recovered from the conspirators' archives. Inside was a secret document revealing a truth about Dominic Moretti that changed everything she thought she knew about him. The city slowly returned to normal after weeks of fear, corruption, and violence. News reports exposed a criminal network that had operated behind political offices, business organizations, and law enforcement agencies for years. Powerful figures who once seemed untouchable were arrested, while the remaining conspirators either disappeared or lost their influence completely. For the first time since the shooting, Ava Carter woke up without wondering who might be hunting her. Yet despite everything that had happened, one question still remained unanswered. Why had Dominic Moretti noticed her before anyone else? The answer arrived only after the final pieces of conspiracy were uncovered. While reviewing archive files connected to her father, Ava discovered records that had been hidden for decades. Buried inside those documents was evidence revealing a forgotten chapter of Dominic's past. Long before he became one of the most feared men in Chicago, he had been a young man struggling to survive in a dangerous world. Years earlier, Ava's father had secretly helped him escape a situation that would have ended his life. The act had never become public knowledge. No rewards had been exchanged. No recognition had been given. Only a promise. A promise that if anything ever happened to Ava's father, Dominic would watch over people he left behind. The discovery changed everything Ava thought she knew. The charity event had not been the first time Dominic had seen her. For years, he had quietly monitored her life from a distance. He never interfered. He never approached her. He simply honored a debt that nobody else even knew existed. Then the conspiracy began moving against her. The moment Dominic realized she had become a target, he stepped out of the shadows and fulfilled the promise he had carried for years. The realization struck Ava with unexpected force. Sometimes the most powerful acts of loyalty are the ones nobody sees. Public opinion toward Dominic slowly shifted as more truths surfaced. People who once viewed him as nothing more than a ruthless mafia boss began recognizing the sacrifices he had made to stop a far greater threat. He never sought praise for any of it. Meanwhile, Ava finally had the freedom to choose her own future, not one built on lies, not one controlled by fear, but one shaped by her own decisions. The investigation was over. The conspiracy was gone. The danger had passed. Yet one thing remained. The bond forged through survival, trust, and sacrifice. For the first time in years, Dominic allowed his emotional walls to fall. And for the first time, Ava saw the complete man behind the reputation. The shooting had changed both of their lives forever. Ava realized Dominic did not pull her from the crowd because she was a stranger in danger. He pulled her away because he had spent years keeping a promise he made to a man who once saved his life. Sometimes a hand that saves your life is the same hand fate planned for you all along.